Hello, small anthropoids. We are finishing up with Galileo's Starry Messenger today. As a reminder for those new jumping in this week, welcome. Galileo was the first to create a modern telescope, which he used to discover that the moon was like Earth, with craters and mountains and not at all smooth, as you heard from his own 400-year-old words last week. This week, we finish up with his last 5 pages, where he talks about there being more stars through the telescope than when viewed with the naked eye. And his most proud achievement, discovering the Medicean stars, commonly known today as Jupiter's moons. A reminder, although his work in astronomy and mathematics is Galileo's finest achievement, the Church gave him an extremely tight leash to work with. However, the leash was loose enough for Galileo to firmly pronounce Copernicus's findings to be true, that the Earth is not the center of the universe, that humans are not God's most beloved and important beings, but actually that we are quite small, and the universe is bigger than we ever could have imagined. This fact doesn't have to disprove the idea of God for believers, but it is a difficult fact to swallow, especially for the time. We tiny humans do not make planets move. We are simply hitchhikers, along for the ride on a planet that does not belong to us, but takes us where we need to go. Galileo, as a 60-year-old man, stood trial for his crime of saying that the Earth is not the center of the universe. The moment he realized the telescope he held in his hands was actually the instrument of destruction for the center of the universe theory was when he observed Venus going through phases like the moon. In other words, Venus moved around the sun, not Earth. He could not lie about his findings. The world had to know. After publishing not in scientific Latin, but in even more dangerous of a threat, the commonly spoken and understood Italian, he was accused by the Church of heresy. At his trial, Galileo was shown the instruments of torture he would receive if he did not recant his work. Galileo stopped most of his work, was forced to recant most of it, and was placed under house arrest for the remaining 9 years of his life. When given his life sentence, Galileo is famously said to have uttered the words, "Eppur si muove," and yet it moves. Whether those last words are true or not, it is anyone's guess, but it makes for a good story. What is true is the Church admitted they were wrong, and Galileo was right by clearing his name in 1983, 350 years later, and apologizing in 1992, 359 years later. Furthermore, you can see none other than Galileo's petrified middle finger on display in the Istituto e Museo di Storia della Scienza in Firenze, Italia, Florence, Italy. What better finger to be preserved? With that, sit back, enjoy this trip through time, space, and music. Here is the remainder of Starry Messenger by Galileo Galilei. Thus far, we have spoken of our observations concerning the body of the moon. Let us now set forth briefly what has thus far been observed regarding the fixed stars. And first of all, the following fact deserves consideration. The stars, whether fixed or wandering, appear not to be enlarged by the telescope in the same proportion as that in which it magnifies other objects, and even the moon itself. In the stars, this enlargement seems to be so much less that a telescope which is sufficiently powerful to magnify other objects 100-fold is scarcely able to enlarge the stars 4 or 5 times. The reason for this is as follows. When stars are viewed by means of unaided natural vision, they present themselves to us not as of their simple, and so to speak, their physical size, but as irradiated by a certain fulgor, and as fringed with sparkling rays, especially when the night is far advanced. From this they appear larger than they would if stripped of those adventurous hairs of light, for the angle at the eye is determined not by the primary body of the star, but by the brightness which extends so widely about it. This appears quite clearly from the fact that when the stars first emerge from twilight at sunset, they look very small, even if they are of the first magnitude. Venus itself, when visible in broad daylight, is so small as scarcely to appear equal to a star of the 6th magnitude. Things fall out differently with other objects, and even with the moon itself. These, whether seen in daylight or the deepest night, appear always of the same bulk. Therefore, the stars are seen crowned among shadows, while daylight is able to remove their headgear. And not daylight alone, but any thin cloud that interposes itself between a star and the eye of the observer. The same effect is produced by black veils or colored glasses, through the interposition of which obstacles the stars are abandoned by their surrounding brilliance. A telescope similarly accomplishes the same result. It removes from the stars their adventitious and accidental rays, and then it enlarges their simple globes, if indeed the stars are naturally globular, so that they seem to be magnified in a lesser ratio than other objects. In fact, a star of the 5th or 6th magnitude, when seen through a telescope, presents itself as one of the 1st magnitude. Deserving of such notice also is the difference between the appearances of the planets and the fixed stars. The planets show their globes perfectly round and definitely bounded, looking like little moons, spherical and flooded all over with light. The fixed stars are never to be bounded by circular periphery, but have rather the aspect of blazes whose rays vibrate around them and scintillate a great deal. Viewed with a telescope, they appear of a shape similar to that which they present to the naked eye, but sufficiently enlarged so that a star of the 5th or 6th magnitude seems equal to the dog star, largest of all fixed stars. Now, in addition to stars of the 6th magnitude, a host of other stars are perceived through the telescope, which escape the naked eye. These are so numerous as almost to surpass belief. One may, in fact, see more of them than all the stars included among the first 6 magnitudes. The largest of these, which we may call stars of the 7th magnitude, or the 1st magnitude of invisible stars, appear through the telescope as larger and brighter than stars of the 2nd magnitude when the latter are viewed with the naked eye. In order to give 1 or 2 proofs of their almost inconceivable number, I have adjoined pictures of 2 constellations. With these samples, you may judge all of the others. In the first, I had intended to depict the entire constellation of Orion, but I was overwhelmed by the vast quantity of stars and by limitations of time, so I have deferred this to another occasion. There are more than 500 new stars distributed among the old ones within limits of 1 or 2 degrees of arc. Hence, to the 3 stars in the belt of Orion and the 6 in the sword, which were previously known, I have added 80 adjacent stars discovered recently, preserving the intervals between them as exactly as I could. To distinguish the known or ancient stars, I have depicted them larger and have outlined them doubly. The other invisible stars I have drawn smaller and without the extra line. I have also preserved differences of magnitude as well as possible. In the second example, I have depicted the 6 stars of Taurus, known as the Pleiades. I say 6, inasmuch as the 7th is hardly ever visible, which lie within very narrow limits in the sky. Near them are more than 40 others, invisible, no one of which is much more than half a degree away from the original 6. I have shown 36 of these in the diagram. As in the case of Orion, I have preserved their intervals and magnitudes, as well as the distinction between old stars and new. Third, I have observed the nature and the material of the Milky Way. With the aid of the telescope, this has been scrutinized so directly and with such ocular certainty that all the disputes which have vexed philosophers through so many ages have been resolved, and we are at last freed from wordy debates about it. The galaxy is, in fact, nothing but a congeries of innumerable stars grouped together in clusters. Upon whatever part of it the telescope is directed, a vast crowd of stars is immediately presented to view. Many of them are rather large and quite bright, while the number of smaller ones is quite beyond calculation. But it is not only in the Milky Way that whitish clouds are seen. Several patches of similar aspect shine with faint light here and there throughout the ether, and if the telescope is turned upon any of these, it confronts us with a tight mass of stars. And what is even more remarkable, the stars which have been called nebulous by every astronomer up to this time turn out to be groups of very small stars arranged in a wonderful manner. Although each star separately escapes our sight on account of its smallness or the immense distance from us, the mingling of their rays gives rise to that gleam which was formerly believed to be some denser part of the ether that was capable of reflecting rays from stars or from the sun. I have observed some of these constellations and have decided to depict two of them. In the first, you have the nebula called the Head of Orion, in which I have counted 21 stars. The second contains the nebula called Praesepe, which is not a jingle star, but a mass of more than 40 starlets. Of these, I have shown 36, in addition to the ocelli, arranged in the order shown. We have now briefly recounted the observations made thus far with regard to the Moon, the fixed stars, and the Milky Way. There remains the matter which, in my opinion, deserves to be considered the most important of all the disclosure of 4 planets never seen from the creation of the world up to our own time, together with the occasion of my having discovered and studied them, their arrangements, and the observations made of their movements and alterations during the past 2 months. I invite all astronomers to apply themselves to examine them and determine periodic times, something which has so far been quite impossible to complete, owing to the shortness of the time. Once more, however, warning is given that it will be necessary to have a very accurate telescope, such as we have described in the beginning of this disclosure. On the 7th day of January in this present year 1610, at the first hour of night, when I was viewing the heavenly bodies with a telescope, Jupiter presented itself to me. And because I had prepared a very excellent instrument for myself, I perceived, as I had not before, on account of the weakness of my previous instrument, that beside the planets were 3 starlets, small indeed, but very bright. Though I believed them to be among the host of fixed stars, they aroused my curiosity somewhat by appearing to lie in an exact straight line parallel to the ecliptic, and by their being more splendid than others of their size. Their arrangement with respect to Jupiter and each other was the following. I paid no attention to the distances between them and Jupiter, for at the outset I thought them to be fixed stars, as I have said. But returning to the same investigation on January 8th led by what, I do not know, I found a very different arrangement. The 3 starlets were now all to the west of Jupiter, closer together, and at equal intervals from one another as shown in the following sketch. At this time, though I did not yet turn my attention to the way the stars had come together, I began to concern myself with the question how Jupiter could be east of all of these stars when on the previous day it had been west of 2 of them. I commenced to wonder whether Jupiter was not moving eastward at the time, contrary to the computations of astronomers, and had got in front of them by that motion. Hence it was with great interest that I awaited the next night. But I was disappointed in my hopes, for the sky was then covered with clouds everywhere. On the 10th night of January, however, the stars appeared in this position with respect to Jupiter. That is, there were 2 of them, both easterly, the third, as I supposed, being hidden behind Jupiter. As at first, they were in the same straight line with Jupiter, and were arranged precisely in the middle of the zodiac. Noticing this, and knowing that there was no way in which such alterations could be attributed to Jupiter's motion, yet being certain that these were still the same stars I had observed, in fact, no other was to be found along the line of the zodiac, for a long way on either side of Jupiter, my perplexity was now transformed into amazement. I was sure that the apparent changes belonged not to Jupiter, but to the observed stars, and I resolved to pursue this investigation with greater care and attention. And thus, On the 11th of January, I saw the following disposition. There were 2 stars, both to the east, the central one being 3 times as far from Jupiter as from the one farther east. The latter star was nearly double the size of the former, whereas on the night before, they had appeared approximately equal. 4 wanderers complete their revolutions about Jupiter, and of their alterations as observed more precisely later on, we shall give a description here. Also, I measured the distances between them by means of the telescope, using the method explained before. Moreover, I recorded the times of the observations, especially when more than one was made during the same night, for the revolutions of these planets are so speedily completed that it is usually possible to take even their hourly variations. Thus, on the 12th of January, at the first hour of the night, I saw the stars arranged in this way. The most easterly star was larger than the western one, though both were easily visible and quite bright. Each was about 2 minutes of arc distant from Jupiter. The third star was invisible at first, but commenced to appear after 2 hours. It almost touched Jupiter on the east, and was quite small. All were on the same straight line directed along the ecliptic. On the 13th of January, 4 stars were seen by me for the first time in this situation relative to Jupiter. 3 were westerly, and 1 was to the east. They formed a straight line, except that the middle western star departed slightly toward the north. The eastern star was 2 minutes of arc away from Jupiter, and the intervals of the rest from one another and from Jupiter were about 1 minute. All the stars appeared to be of the same magnitude, and though small were very bright, much brighter than fixed stars of the same size. On the 26th of February, midway in the first hour A night, there were only 2 stars. One was to the east, 10 minutes from Jupiter, the other to the west, 6 minutes away. The eastern one was somewhat smaller than the western, but at the 5th hour, 3 stars were seen. This night, for the first time, I wanted to observe the progress of Jupiter and its accompanying planets along the line of the zodiac in relation to some fixed star, and such a star was seen to the east, 11 minutes distant from the easterly starlet, and a little removed toward the south, in the following manner. On the 27th of February, 4 minutes after the first hour, the stars appeared in this configuration. The most easterly was 10 minutes from Jupiter, the next 30 seconds. The next to the west was 2 minutes 30 seconds from Jupiter, and the most westerly was 1 minute from that. Those nearest Jupiter appeared very small, while the end ones were plainly visible, especially the westernmost. They marked out an exactly straight line along the course of the ecliptic. The progress of these planets toward the east is seen quite clearly by reference to the fixed stars mentioned, since Jupiter and its accompanying planets were closer to it, as may be seen in the figure above. At the 5th hour, the eastern star closer to Jupiter was 1 minute away. At the first hour on February 28th, 2 stars only were seen, one easterly, distant 9 minutes from Jupiter, and one to the west, 2 minutes away. They were easily visible and on the same straight line. The fixed star, perpendicular to this line, now fell under the eastern planet as in the figure. At the 5th hour, a 3rd star, 2 minutes east of Jupiter, was seen in this position. On the 1st of March, 40 minutes after sunset, 4 stars all to the east were seen, of which the nearest to Jupiter was 2 minutes away. The next was 1 minute from. The third 2 seconds from that, and brighter than any of the others. From this in turn, the most easterly was our minutes distant, and it was smaller than the rest. They marked almost a straight line, but the third one, counting from Jupiter, was a little to the north. The fixed star formed an equilateral triangle with Jupiter and the most easterly star, as in this figure. On March 2nd, half an hour after sunset, there were 3 planets, 2 to the east and 1 to the west, in this configuration. The most easterly was 7 minutes from Jupiter and 30 seconds from its neighbor. The western one was 2 minutes away from Jupiter. The end stars were bright and were larger than that in the middle, which appeared very small. The most easterly star appeared a little elevated toward the north from the straight line through the other planets and Jupiter. The fixed star, previously mentioned, was 8 minutes from the western planet along the line drawn from it perpendicularly to the straight line through all the planets, as shown above. I have reported these relations of Jupiter and its companions with the fixed star so that anyone may comprehend the progress of those planets, both in longitude and latitude, agrees exactly with the movements derived from planetary tables. Such are the observations concerning the 4 Medicean planets, recently discovered by me, and although from these data their periods have not yet been reconstructed in numerical form, it is legitimate at least to put in evidence some facts worthy of note. Above all, since they sometimes follow and sometimes precede Jupiter by the same intervals, and they remain within very limited distances either to the east or west of Jupiter, accompanying that planet in both its retrograde and direct movements in a constant manner. No one can doubt that they complete their revolution about Jupiter at the same time effect altogether a 12-year period about the center of the universe. That they also revolve in unequal circles is manifestly deduced from the fact that at the greatest elongation from Jupiter, it is never possible to see 2 of these planets in conjunction, whereas in the vicinity of Jupiter, they are found united 2, 3, and sometimes all 4 together. It is also observed that the revolutions are swifter in those planets which describe smaller circles about Jupiter, since the stars closest to Jupiter are usually seen to the east, when on the previous day they appeared to the west, and vice versa, while the planet which traces the largest orbit appears to be an accurate observation of its return to have a semi-monthly period. Here we have a fine and elegant argument for quieting the doubts of those who, while accepting with tranquil mind the revolutions of the planets about the sun in the Copernican system, are mightily disturbed to have the moon alone revolve about the earth and accompany it in an annual rotation about the sun. Some have believed that this structure of the universe should be rejected as impossible, but now we have not just one planet rotating about another, while both run through a great orbit around the sun. Our own eyes show us 4 stars which wander around Jupiter, as does the moon around the earth, while all together trace out grand revolution about the sun in the space of 12 years. And finally, we should not omit the reason for which the Medicean stars appear sometimes to be twice as large at other times, though their orbits about Jupiter are very restricted. We certainly cannot seek the cause in terrestrial vapors, as Jupiter and its neighboring fixed stars are not seen to change size in the least, while this increase and diminution are taking place. It is quite unthinkable that the cause of variation should be their change of distance from the Earth at perigee and apogee, since a small circular rotation could by no means produce this effect, and an oval motion, which in this case have to be nearly straight, seems unthinkable and quite inconsistent with the appearances. But I shall gladly explain what occurs to me on this matter, offering it freely to the judgment and criticism of thoughtful people. It is known that the interposition of terrestrial vapors makes the sun and moon appear large, while the fixed stars and planets are made to appear smaller. Thus the 2 great luminaries are seen larger when close to the horizon, while the stars appear smaller and for the most part hardly visible. Hence the stars appear very feeble by day and in twilight, though the moon does not, as we have said. Now from what has been said above, and even more from what we shall say at greater length in our system, it follows that only the Earth, but also the moon, is surrounded by an envelope of vapors, and we may apply precisely the same judgment to the rest of the planets. Hence it does not appear entirely impossible to assume that around Jupiter also there exists an envelope denser than the rest of the ether, about which the Medicean planets revolve as does the moon about the elemental sphere. Through the interposition of this envelope, they appear larger when they are in perigee by the removal, or at least the attenuation, of this envelope. Time prevents my proceeding further, but the gentle reader may expect more soon. Finis. That concludes Starry Messenger by Galileo Galilei. Next week, we'll pick up with a very famous comet that has dethroned kings, won and lost wars, and left emperors shaking in their boots, all until a fellow named Halley decided to try and figure out what it is. If you enjoyed, please like, subscribe, and tell your friends. We are always looking for ways to improve, so if there's something different you would like to see within the podcast or a story you would like us to cover, let us know. This one's for you, Amy. We hope you found that small is not scary. Thanks for listening. Stay curious and take care, small anthropoids.